Hi, this is James Gardner of CineTechGeek, and I've got another video for you. Now, it's been quite a while because, like many of you, like I own my cinemas and running my cinemas, we are quite preoccupied with how we're going to restart after the COVID crisis, or during this crisis, which is going to continue on for quite some time, and it is quite depressing. I actually find myself a bit depressed about it sometimes, and so, I thought the best thing we could do is try to come up with ideas to make us more efficient, make us survive. We have limitations. I'll get into the video and I'll explain to you why this is some important data to help us, as especially smaller cinemas, to survive the limits and restrictions that are going to be upon us during the COVID crisis. So let's get into the presentation. Here we go. Now, the presentation, projectionist infrastructure, cost savings for cinemas. Now, this is essential survival for the COVID crisis. So what we're trying to do here, we're trying to, this is an area where there is a lot of potential for some cost savings. So I thought I'd do a video on it. And this is also in conjunction or association with the Small Cinema Owners Association here in Australia. So let's get into the presentation. So here we go. I'll just put on my little video up the top there so you can still see me. Overview of presentation. So I'm just going to go over there. There's quite a few things here, but I'll go over them quite quickly. So don't be afraid. So why is it so important? How does it help? This help us? Security of your network questions. There's questions you need to ask you about your security and why you're doing your security, and does it save you money, cost you money, and all those sort of issues, which help you understand where the cost savings are here. Things you didn't know, or did you know these facts about how this affects you in security? Opinion of convenience is a common issue. We're battling with this issue. Complexity, I'll just explain some of the complexity issues which are thrown in to try and muddy the waters and why they do it. What cinemas actually want from their projection network. We'll discuss that. Then a few issues about the future of things you should look out for and what you should expect. And then I'm actually going to go over some examples of different levels of network implementation and what works, what doesn't, and why you would probably go with this network implementation over another. What sort of size cinema, what's the size of your complex or organizational chain, those sort of issues. So let's go. Next one. Why so important? The COVID-19 and distancing regulation. So, at the bottom there, estimated only 40% maximum seating utilisation of screens. So we have to become more efficient. It's estimated 1 year plus, or until vaccine has been developed and deployed to the population. That could take some time. And if we have to survive under 40% utilisation of our screens, well, we've really got to lift our game in other parts of our running of the cinema to make up for that penalty. So let's keep going. Also, VPF is over. Yay. There's a considerable amount of fat that came with the VPF and the requirements of the VPF. The entity had to track what your systems were doing. There was network infrastructure put in there, and they tended to put a lot of very complicated network infrastructure in there. We'll discuss as to why later on. But under the VPF, we can now it's gone. We can cut a lot of that fat, those requirements that we no longer need to do, and those requirements cost us money. So let's get rid of them. How does this help? Okay. So, like I said before, COVID-based restrictions will make it harder to be commercial, i.e. to be a viable, profitable business. Cinemas, small cinemas especially, must become more streamlined, productive, and do more for less, Cinema projection networks typically have a lot of cost-saving opportunities due to the unwinding of the VPF requirements. So just get through that. Security of your network. Let's ask a few questions about that. How secure does your network need to be? Consider that. How secure is your front of house network, your POS network, point of sale network? Do you need bank level security, and where in your business? You don't need bank level security, but some of you do have it because of the VPF, but let's keep going. Are you a small independent or a huge multiplex? Are you part of a huge cinema chain? You know, each business and the size of that business may consider the savings of the implementation of security differently, and it may make sense for more for others and less for others. So small cinemas, a lot of this extra security is just a waste of money, in my opinion. Which network should you have most secure? Well, obviously that's going to be a POS network because, well, that's where transactions and potential banking details, things that could be stolen, etc., access to other people's information. So, so why isn't that bank level security is a question if you are going to go to that level of security, which you don't really need to, but it's just some questions to consider. Okay, why is the projection network more secure than your POS network when there is nothing that can be stolen? So what do I mean by that? So let's have a look. Did you know encrypted DCPs are secure no matter what? Even if you give copies to every patron that comes to your cinema, it's just as secure because it's encrypted. It's encrypted all the way into the secure media block of the projector. So if someone does infiltrate into your projection network, what's the best they can do? They could interrupt the session. Does that need bank level security? I don't think so. It doesn't seem to, the costs involved to have that level of security compared to the potential loss. It seems a bit outweighed. Secondly, if someone had the skills to get into your network, wouldn't they go for your POS system or something? If they have those skills, wouldn't they be going for something where they could actually potentially get a return rather than disrupting a session? Doesn't make sense to me. So there's a good question here. Why do VPF entities require bank level security? You should ask yourself that. Considering what you know now, why do you think they impose bank level security? Meaning that if you just want to plug one port from one to another in your switch, you have to get their permission and they have to configure the network to do so. And they can actually track every time you plug something in and out of a port and it flashes up on their screen. Do you need that security in your projection network? What are you protecting? How much, what's the return? So at the bottom, if a compromise, what's the worst it can do? We've discussed that. Let's keep going. So let's talk about an opinion of convenience here. Now, this is where it really comes down to, and this is where the rub with me, where it sort of rubs me the wrong way. Right? This is how I feel. I'm just sharing this. You can feel differently. It's totally come back in the comments if you have a difference of opinion. I really appreciate that. So there's two options for support VPF entities have used to justify the complex bank level type security. Now these entities do not understand the technology, and as such they would think, oh, we're protecting Hollywood content, so it needs to be very secure. Well, if they think that, then obviously they have no idea what they're talking about because it's already all encrypted and secure into the media block. So if they don't understand that, should that company that has that lack of understanding be an entity that's supporting you? I wouldn't use them. Obviously they don't know what they're doing. Then there's the understanding of the technology. You may have an entity who does understand the technology, but they want to lock you in. They want to make sure that you can't really go anywhere else. So they can, put you in a position where they sort of monopolize you. So if they need support, they can't go to anyone but you. And so they're in a monopolistic position, and as such, along come monopolistic prices, wouldn't you think? Monopolistic position tends to adopt monopolistic pricing. This is not what we want. We want to save our costs. Now, there's nothing wrong with these decisions that these entities have made. It's just a natural business decision that you would probably make if you were in their position and could make that position. It's really you as the cinema owner whose responsibility is to do your due diligence to understand the motivations behind the entities that you're doing your deals with. And that's why I talk a lot about trust in your service entities, that you trust them to treat you correctly and to do you a good deal and not put you in a poor position, right? Which unfortunately, like what I'm describing here is very common here in my region. So, complexity explained. Now, technologies used that are not required but only lock you into a single supplier as complex configurations lock competitors out. You know, that's one of the justifications or motivations for why they take some of these paths. So some of the technologies they may use, I'll just describe them very quickly so you understand what they do. So VLANs, basically that's the stuff where they can detect whenever you plug anything in and out of a port, and if that port can communicate to the right machines that they need to communicate. So with VLANs you can ensure that one machine can talk to one machine but not to another machine. It's very much more secure, right? Now the justification for that is that, you know, some cinemas may interact with other cinemas and potentially there could be an error while servicing. Well, in my book, I've never really done a lot of servicing inside operational hours, so those sort of issues can, you know, be taken care of with procedural ideas or procedural technologies. You know, just don't open yourself to some sort of issues. You know, VLANs could protect you from that, but protecting you from what? If you're not actually doing maintenance during operational hours, or very rarely do it, and you've got good trained people doing it, do you need to spend all this extra money for an if? Consider that. Do you need to spend it? Okay, custom firewalls. Again, they just like to implement custom firewalls because they can, because it secures the network a bit more. Again, we've discussed what are they securing it against and what's going to go wrong. So they implement stuff like that. So it's, you know, really anyone, if you've got a custom configuration, the only person that can come in and touch it is the person who created it, because an outsider has no idea what's going on or the access to do so. So you're locked in. Complex network designs based on non-byte bound subnets. What does that mean? You probably are asking. Well, that basically means that, you know, the IP addresses and the numbers, etc., that you use to talk to everything. You can use very basic ones where it's just number, and it's very easy to understand. Or you can do non-byte bound where the numbers start to get a little bit all over the place, and you need to get out, you know, your calculator to work out where these subnets start and end. It just adds a lot of complexity, truly, if you ask me. And also dual network management. So there's a bit of a conundrum, like in the, you know, there's a lot of talk about an admin network and a media network. So where does that come from? Well, I've been in this for a long time, and I've actually asked some of the engineers from Dolby, etc. So why do we have an admin and a media network? No real reason really is usually the expression, but I really think that comes back from the initial players from Dolby, etc. were double-headed or double computer systems where they had a computer for the media and a computer for the player, and they needed a network to talk to each of them. So there was this media and admin network sort of theory that came in, and that sort of carried through into the current systems when really you only really need one network. You know, like the internet where we watch videos and do everything over the same network, we can do that in the cinema as well. We do not have to double up on switches or use VLANs to turn a switch into two switches and all these sort of things. You can just use the single segmented, you know, network in your location. You don't have to double up or spend extra money or anything. It'll work fine. Okay. Obviously, these technologies can improve security and potential network performance, but do you need it? No, you don't. Costs that are not required by the cinema. This is what I'm getting at. So if you've got an integrator which is applying these technologies and say you must have them, you really have to ask why they're pushing these technologies down your throat, because you don't really need them, and there's not a lot of benefit from going down those utilizing these complex technologies, especially if you're a small cinema. Right, so let's keep going. So what do cinemas really want? What do you want for your projection network? So let's look at that. Like, this is where it came to me. Like, as you know, I was involved in an integration company, and I actually, during the time that actually fell down due to a legal issue, which unfortunately made that fall over, because I had this is the way I was going to implement the network for my cinemas who are going onto my VPF. It was the VPF, it was the most cost-effective VPF based on what was discovered in courts and blah, blah, blah. And this is how I was going to implement it. Unfortunately, it was derailed, and most of Australia ended up with a very complex implementation by another entity. So, in my vision of the network for cinema owners, in our implementation of the VPF, my idea was that what you want is you want to be able to basically swap out a switch if it fails with something you can go down the street from Officeworks and just swap it out, get back on screen as quickly as possible. Now, with these complex VLANs and strains, subnets, etc., to get a switch to replace that broken switch, it will have to come from that entity. They will have to source the switch, they will have to program the switch, right? Then they have to dispatch it to you, potentially with an engineer from a long way away. If your original location would have to come in and install the switch. It sounds very, very expensive compared to going down to Officeworks and buying a no-name switch and slapping it in there. Obviously, you could probably get a better switch in the meantime, but if you just needed to get one to get on screen, that would have worked. That was my implementation that I wanted to go down. That's not what happened, but that's possible. But it's not what happened with the integrator that actually was adopted in most of Australia. And secondly, you want the ability to go to any cinema service company, because then you can have competition between the entities and you can go to the one you prefer or switch very easily. Because currently with these complex systems, you can't switch, because to switch you basically have to spend numbers of days resetting up your network. Now, in this closure period, we have the opportunity to do that. We are closed. We could have a proper engineer to come in and just basically set everything to default, and everything should, if you basically went through and set every switch back to factory default, it's probably all you need to do to set everything to where it needs to be. You really have to be careful with if they set up some security or other firewalls onto your TMSs and some other devices in your network. But, you know, maybe you can get rid of them or reset things to everything back to default, and it should just all work. I'll go into that a little bit more later when I go through the examples. Okay, now, cost savings through competition is where I really wanted to say this is where we should always have been. At the start, during, and at the end, we should have been in a position when we could be in a position to make sure that we had competition in terms of who we can service our cinemas, because that really helps with competition. Or if an agent isn't doing a very good job, you can switch to another one who's probably better. There's so many reasons that you want to keep that door open. So that's what we need as cinemas. That's what gives us an ability to be cost competitive and to make sure that we're efficient going forward as small cinemas especially. Now the future. Now I want to talk about the future a little bit here. So requirement for online monitoring reduced as equipment becomes more reliable and cinema operators become more adept with supporting their own equipment. So what am I talking about there? Well, the equipment has, over the last 10 to 15 years, it has been refined and refined and refined. It's incredibly reliable now. One would say that, am I spending my money wisely if I'm spending on all this remote monitoring if I haven't used it once in 3 years? That might cost you, a couple of grand a screen per year in monitoring, or whatever. I'm not sure what these guys are charging these days. And if you have quite a few screens, that adds up quite quickly, doesn't it? So, and if you don't have failures that often, maybe not. Or if you're adept in actually, if a screen does fail, if you can log in and grab the analytical or the diagnostic from the particular devices and send it to an engineer of choice, that saves a lot of cost potentially, doesn't it? Without, it's not very hard. So that's a potential future which I think is probably going to happen. But at the same time, I see a lot of vendors, especially projectors and the big iron suppliers, giving or offering free monitoring. They'll have a little box that you just plug into your network, and it'll automatically configure itself and be able to monitor your equipment. They'll be able to, offer these. They're offering these things for free because they know if they are preemptive, they're giving you better service and potentially supplying you much better than the people who aren't offering those services. And also, I'll be honest with you, they also want to keep an eye on the equipment so they can, if they've got that sort of feedback coming from the equipment, that puts them in a far better position to make it more reliable, more cost effective for them in the future. So that's why they're doing it. But at the same time, I also believe that any good integrator will offer free monitoring as well. It's not hard to do. I do it for a lot of my friend cinemas, because for me it's child's play to set up that sort of stuff. And some of my friends call me and says, I've got a problem with my projector. I quickly want to log in and have a look. And I do, because I can. And it took me 10 minutes to set up something like that. And I help out my mates. You know, it's Australia. We are mateship. We help out our friends. That's what we should be doing. That's, crises. Help your mates, help your friends, right? So I see that sort of offering happening where the good entities who know what they're doing, the good support agents, will offer that for free, because really it doesn't really cost them anything. And it's more likely to get you to utilise them because you've got that sort of capability and can offer that capability. Another trend is the move from support for software, specifically things like TMSs, to direct support. Typically, because of the VPF and the contractual agreements involved, you'd have the software vendor, the VPF agent, and the cinema. And the cinema would have to go to the agent to get to the software vendor. How much software today do you go through an agent to have support with? It doesn't sort of happen anymore. It's not really viable. It costs more to a degree. So I expect, for example, if you had a TMS vendor and you had to go to an agent that you got it from, going forward, that probably will change and you'll be able to go direct to the TMS vendor and they'll support you directly. Why not? That's typically what happens with every other industry. It's another trend I expect to happen. Anyway, let's keep going. Here are some basic examples to give you an idea what I'm talking about when it comes to the networks that are happening in cinemas. Like, first of all, this first image here, obviously, it's just a basic office. It could be any business, right? Where you have an administration PC and a point of sale solution, a switch, of course, and a internet router into the through a firewall into the internet. Very basic. That's enough for most small businesses. Okay. Small cinema is a small business. So what's the difference? Not much. All the difference is that now there's a projector on the network. You can have the projector on the same network as your front of house. There's no problems doing that, right? The media block is housed inside the projector and everything, and it's really the only reason you're talking to the projector is either you're controlling it remotely or you're sending content over it remotely. But usually in these situations, you're probably ingesting it directly through a USB drive, right? And you can see here now in this implementation, now we've got different POS service agents, right? You could use different POS service agents and go to which one. That's a choice, but also to your support entities. You could call the one that's currently free. A big problem is you call an entity, says, all our engineers are busy for the next 2 days. I can't come and help you. Well, that's if you've got options, if you can easily go to another entity, it's a much better place to be in. In this situation, I've got the dotted lines here. I'll just point to them. So a lot of the times an entity might have this is what I'm talking about, a box or something in there that allows them to do more proactive monitoring rather than, for example, here on the PC, you might have something as simple as a team viewer. So service entity can basically log in as if they're actually in the cinema and do some diagnostics on your equipment, or they may have an agent here that's permanently there, which allows them to use some automation or more easily monitor or proactively monitor the equipment. So that's an option that you can get. So you don't need it, you can get it. Like I said, I expect some entities will probably offer those sort of features in the future for free, just to encourage them to use them. Now let's jump up to what I consider the typical way that you should implement your projection network in a cinema. Like even in big ones. I don't see anything more than what we've got here, right? So we have the typical front of house network here, right? So you've got your firewall going to your switch, going to admin PC for front of house and doing everything there, and all your POS systems, right? And you're just running the cinema there. And then you have another administration PC specifically for projection administration, controlling, scheduling, and TMS. It could be a TMS system, could just be a PC running something simple. Depends on the size of your cinema. This PC would also potentially be walled off to the front of house, just so you know that nothing front of house is interfering with the back of house if you want to go to that extent, because it's very unlikely to actually affect it, but let's say that you want to do that. And then you've got another separate network, segmented, separate, completely network, which basically goes from this administration PC to the core switch, and then out to every cinema, and they'll probably have a switch in each cinema as well. And every switch in this situation is just a default normal switch you buy off the shelf with no configuration. If it breaks, throw it out, put a new one in from anywhere, it works. Right? The security, if you want any security, is here, where you may want to segment and make sure the only network or stuff getting onto the projection network is that for which is required to be there. That's pretty much as much security I think you should need in a cinema. Anything more, I think, is a waste of money. You don't get the return, in my opinion, on that, right? So, and that's what I would really suggest. Now, if you've got, just before we go on again, you'll see the agent system here, which obviously connects to the front of house network and also to the back of house network, so an agent can actually monitor the stuff remotely again. Just so we can see that, but it's dotted lines because, again, it's optional. You don't really need it. So here's more like what we're actually seeing with a lot of VPF entities forcing down a lot of cinemas' throats here. It's like before, but they have these VPN remote support things. They're required. Typically, what I've seen, a lot of these agents are using MPLS solutions. Extremely expensive, totally old school. These days, everyone's using software-defined networking and other things, or doing directly over your current, or sharing your current internet connection, as, for example, was demonstrated here. This agent is actually sharing the internet to get into do the support. No extra cost. It's just using pre-existing equipment and network. A lot of these agents want to use an out-of-band network, so you've got double the infrastructure, double the costs, using premium networking technology, which is extremely expensive. Secondly, they also have the switches, the core switch at the locations. They implement VLANs, non-byte-bound subnets, all this sophisticated stuff, which makes it very difficult for someone who doesn't know the network to come in and support it. Nearly impossible, if you ask me, because I've had I've got some problems when you come in and can you give me some advice on how what to do with my network? And I said, dude, you've gone with a VPF entity that locks it up like a bank's. I can't do a thing. I can't help you at all. I can tell you that this could be done better, but you could save a lot of costs here, but you don't want to really hear that. So just live with what you've got until you come out of the VPF and talk about it then. Because you can really make some significant changes to save some significant coin by chucking a lot of this bank level security out. You just don't need it. Okay, so pretty much that's the story here. Thanks for watching. Now let me just go back. Is there anything left I need to say? Okay, so finally again, we're heading into some difficult times. So doing more for less, optimizing your costs, saving costs where you can, I highly recommend. Like not paying for extra memberships to certain organisations which aren't really offering you a lot of benefit. As small cinemas, I really encourage that. So, because SCO is an organisation I do a lot of work with, and it helps cinemas. It has no membership fees because it's in there because it loves cinema. It wants to help the industry because it's the right thing to do, and there's a lot of there's a lot of holes in that road, and just talking together in the community. SCO is very much about community-based influence, community-based grouping in terms of how it helps other cinema owners. It helps other cinema owners by acting as getting them to communicate with each other in a way which benefits each other, sharing the knowledge, sharing the information, and sharing the path to, operating their cinema well and to the benefit of the community they serve. Anyway, that's the message I wanted to give you today. Anyway, I hope you like this video. If you like it, I'd really enjoy a thumbs up to encourage me to do more, because it does actually get me more fire to help you guys with some videos. Hope to do some more coming up soon, and also got some other quite interesting stuff in the work. I have been working I've tossed myself at my work during this crisis because it's been quite negative to me, and I've wanted to separate or throw myself into something to distract me. And at some stage I'm hoping to show that off. It's doing some stuff on loudness and some research on how certain parts of cinema work and production, and it's going to be offered to some of the SMPTE and the ISDCF community, so they can, and TASA and other bits and pieces. It's all very technical stuff. That's what I live for. I like to get technical and look at numbers, etc., measure stuff, and come to good solutions, good conclusions based on clear evidence rather than opinion. Anyway, that's James Gardner, the CineTechGeek, for SCO, Small Cinema Owners Australia. Bye for now.